Welcome in everybody to the week 8 Dynasty lessons learned video. Real quick, I wanted to let y'all know that this video is going to be a lot shorter than usual. I did not have the typical time that I did in previous weeks to be able to do a full, weekend's worth of games to go game by game, team by team. So I apologize for that. I didn't want to leave you guys high and dry and not produce a video at all, because there are things to talk about and there were pieces that were being moved in the NFL and storylines that we need to follow for Dynasty that I didn't want to not talk about them. So instead of going game by game, team by team this week, just because I didn't have the time, I have to do another abridged version of this where I really just have 3 kind of storylines or players that I want to highlight and talk about. So I do apologize, but wanted to get that out of the way. We'll go back to the game by game, hopefully next week when I get a little bit more time. But to start things off this week, the big storyline, I think, was Diontae Johnson, of course, getting traded from the Carolina Panthers to the Baltimore Ravens for, I don't even know what it was, like a 5th round pick or essentially something like that, something crazy. So fantastic NFL move. This was absolutely amazing from the Baltimore Ravens standpoint, that they can add another wide receiver, a player that they've been really kind of missing. Like, they drafted Zay Flowers. He's filled in nicely, but they needed somebody else. They needed somebody else to make Rashad Bateman the wide receiver 3, to make Aguilar the wide receiver 4. They just needed another weapon. So this is tremendous from the Baltimore Ravens standpoint. Good for the Carolina Panthers too, to kind of get rid of Diontae and go through their rebuild kind of process and move forward with Leggett and everything like that too. So good for Xavier Leggett. It's very, very good for him. But from the Diontae Johnson and then the Baltimore Ravens side of things, I don't like this. I really don't like it. I mean, Diontae Johnson already this year was kind of up and down. He has 3 games over 20 fantasy points. Then he has 4 games where he didn't even make it to 5 fantasy points. Some of that was because of Bryce Young. Some of that was bad defenses or bad defensive matchups. Like when they played Chicago, he didn't have a good game, even with Andy Dalton, but he had good games with Dalton. And Lamar Jackson is most certainly an upgrade over Andy Dalton. But the problem is that, as we all know, the Baltimore passing game is already a very small pie. They're already throwing it fewer than 30 times a game this year. It's 20, I think it's 29 and a half pass attempts per game for Lamar Jackson this year. So that was enough basically to support Zay Flowers most weeks, although Zay has also been kind of up and down. He's really good in their high scoring matchups, but he can also get kind of game scripted out of games when Derrick Henry's rushing for 150 and 2 and Lamar's rushing for 60, 70 yards and another touchdown. And they just get up quickly. They don't need to throw. And Zay Flowers has been susceptible to also really high highs and really low lows. Mark Andrews has kind of been coming back recently, but some of that is mainly on the back of touchdowns. He scored about 4 or 5 touchdowns in the past 3-4 weeks. So fantastic for him, but it's a lot on the back of touchdowns too. Rashad Bateman already wasn't somebody that we wanted to throw into any lineup, but this even more relegates him to irrelevancy. But I think whenever we're talking about a target share between Diontae Johnson and Zay Flowers, I just don't know if there's enough for both of them every single week to be supported as, solid back end wide receiver 2s, or even just like wide receiver 3s that we feel good about starting every single week. I think these guys are flexible players that you probably are going to want to start more often than not, just because of the offense that they're in and the games that they're going to be in. But I think that they're just going to cannibalize each other too much. And that's, of course, from a very narrow-minded, rest of 2024 season outlook. Of course, from a dynasty standpoint, Diontae Johnson is going to be a free agent at the end of the year. So if he even stays in Baltimore, who knows? So for Zay Flowers, of course, being 4 or 5 years younger, it's going to be all right for Zay Flowers. But that still, I think, is indicative that Baltimore realizes that the wide receiver position is still something of need. So if they don't re-sign Diontae Johnson at the end of the year, they could maybe draft somebody or sign somebody else or trade for somebody else. And then that's still kind of an issue for Zay Flowers. It's kind of been an underlying problem that I've had with him already from a dynasty standpoint, that he just doesn't feel like a true one. And if they brought anybody else in, just due to the nature of that offense with a lack of passing volume, that it was not going to be good for Zay Flowers. He's an immense talent, but I just don't know if the dynasty value that he holds as a young, solid wide receiver is going to be maintained by the production that's going to follow for the rest of the year and potentially even into next year if Diontae is re-signed or if they add somebody else instead. So that's kind of where we're at with the Diontae Johnson trade. I would love to trade away Zay Flowers if you can. I've been trying to do that already if you already had Zay Flowers, but the production was still solid enough. But if you can move him off for T. Higgins or DK Metcalf, or if you're rebuilding, maybe you go try to see if you can get Brandon Ayuk. Maybe add something to try to see if you can go over to get to Rashee Rice. George Pickens, Jalen Waddle. I think that there are a lot of really good names in Zay Flowers' value range that you can pivot off to pretty easily, even with Diontae Johnson being there. Diontae, I have the advice for him specifically to be a sell, but I just don't know what you're going to be able to even sell him for. Like on KTC rankings, he's currently being valued as the wide receiver. Where is he in here? Wide receiver 45. So that's right behind Khalil Shakir, Romeo Doubs, and Xavier Legette, and Amari Cooper. So if you can move Diontae for Amari as a contender, I think that's a win. If you can move him for, man, I don't even know, Darnell Mooney, Michael Pittman, maybe you could buy low on Mike Evans since Evans isn't playing. Add a pick to go to get Mike Evans. Add a pick to go to get Cooper Kupp. It's hard sledding right now with Diontae Johnson. I think you just have to wait and see and hope that maybe he does end up being more of the wide receiver one on the team or the 1A, and has good games in a much better offense with a much better quarterback. So my advice is to sell, but you might not, in reality, that might not be a super effective thing to do if you're not getting good enough prices for him. Next on the list is Anthony Richardson, who has officially been benched for Joe Flacco. The time has come. This has kind of been something that has been in the works, I think, for a while, even with his injury, but then he returned from injury, still didn't play well. And then I think the cherry on top was the optics of pulling himself from the game, benching him when he got tired. Now, I've seen people on both sides of that argument. I'm not going to get into it on whether or not that was actually smart for him to do, or if, the other people have seen it as he just quit on his team. I'm not going to get into that, honestly, whatever. But I think the optics of that looked really, really bad. That then to be able to go back to Anthony Richardson was just not something that Steichen, I think, would have been able to do. And I do think that Joe Flacco gives them a better opportunity to win now in 2024, if that is the goal that they're going for. Again, not sure if that's the smartest goal with the team and where they're at right now, but this has been a team that has tried to make it work with Phillip Rivers, with Matt Ryan, with Carson Wentz. They've done everything they can to not rebuild. So I understand why they now turn to Joe Flacco to continue to try to not rebuild, which may or may not be smart, probably isn't. But that's where we're at right now. Of course, Joe Flacco, just to put a bow on that, of course, Joe Flacco is definitely better for the fantasy options on the Colts. So stock up for Michael Pittman, stock up for Josh Downs, especially probably stock up for Jonathan Taylor as well. So good things for them if Flacco remains the starter for the remainder of the year. So that's where we're at with them. Now, Anthony Richardson specifically, of course, he already did not have a good season, even when he was healthy. He hasn't broken 13 fantasy points since his big week 1 game where he had, I think, 25 fantasy points in week 1. He hasn't broken 13 since. And that's been in games where he's gotten hurt. It's been in games where he's played the full 100% of snaps. The rushing upside is still there, so it's kind of crazy given the fact that he's rushing for 40, 50, 60 yards in the game that he can't break 13 fantasy points. He only has 4 passing touchdowns in 5 games played. And, of course, the big highlight is the 44% completion percentage, which, again, I've seen all the film people are saying that his film looks so much better than his stat line, that receivers have been dropping passes. I get all that. But at the same time, I think that this is still just who Anthony Richardson is. I mean, you look back at what he was in college. He only played 1 year in college, and he had a 53% completion percentage. You don't go to the NFL if you are a bad and inaccurate passer and then suddenly become a good, accurate passer in the NFL. There are, of course, outliers to every single rule. Everybody wants to play. If Josh Allen didn't do what Josh Allen did, we would not still have confidence that Anthony Richardson could achieve a level or a ceiling of success because Josh Allen did what he did. Lamar, to an extent, kind of did that too, but he progressively got better every single year and was basically at 60% completion percentage in his final season. Josh Allen is really it, man. But Anthony Richardson was worse in college than Josh Allen, and he's been worse in the NFL. And it's not a place that you go to all of a sudden develop into a good player. So I think that this is, Anthony Richardson, I just don't think is a good passer of the football. And this is what I've been talking about for the past few weeks now, that I think Richardson is more in the career path of a Justin Fields or a Marcus Mariota, one of those kind of guys, than he is Lamar Jackson or Josh Allen. I don't think that Anthony Richardson's career is done. I don't think he's done in the NFL. He might not even be done with the Indianapolis Colts. But I do think that he is basically somebody that we need to learn from, that a player could have all of the traits in the world, all of the upside in the world, all of the athleticism in the world, and still it comes down to whether or not he can do his job effectively. And I think that this is another thing too, where, I've talked about this a lot with rookie wide receivers, with route running and everything, that the NFL is not a league to go into and be a developmental player. Of course, if we've seen players develop in the NFL and become better players because of the overall athleticism that they have. But in most cases, you do not enter the NFL and get developed into being a better player than what you were in college. So I think that this is just another example of a player in the NFL that just was a project, and the project outcome did not result in anything that we wanted. And so that's basically where we're at with Anthony Richardson. My advice is to hold. I don't think you can sell him. His keep trade cut value is basically demolished. You'd be moving him for Matthew Stafford or Derek Carr, and I just don't think that is worth it. Even if you're a contender, I still don't think that that's really worth it. I'd rather go out and buy those guys individually for like a second and a third if you need the production now, than use Anthony Richardson as the way to move over to those guys. Of course, if you can move Anthony Richardson and move up to a Baker or a Goff or somebody like that, then absolutely do that. But I don't think that that's really all that realistic. So that's why I think that Anthony Richardson is a hold. I think that he is where Justin Fields was at the end of last year when they had the 101. Everybody basically thought that they were going to get Caleb Williams. They ended up doing that. Where was Justin Fields going to go? I think that's where Anthony Richardson is right now. It makes no sense to sell him. And you just got to wait to see if he gets his starting job back, or if they move on from him and he gets another starting job somewhere else. And maybe that helps increase his value if he has a better situation, better weapons, or really just actually plays again. So hold on to Anthony Richardson. Not buying him either, unless somebody's like super panicking and you get him for like a couple thirds or something like that. Or you could be the person that trades, Russell Wilson for Anthony Richardson if you're not a contender or something like that. Then by all means, that's how I would buy Anthony Richardson. But I'm not really actively buying him right now. He's just a very solid hold. I think you're stuck with him. But in much better news, to kind of end this video on a positive note, this is the final slide. But to end it on a positive note, Cedric Tillman, man. First of all, the Cleveland Browns offense looked phenomenal with Jameis Winston. In Jameis Winston, we trust. Everybody looked great. David Njoku was fantastic. Elijah Moore was fantastic. Jerry Jeudy even did well. Cedric Tillman out here doing big boy things. 28.9 fantasy points. I don't know why I didn't change that in week 4. That should say in week 8. Anyway, 7 receptions for 99 yards and 2 touchdowns on 9 targets. And remember, last week, he went 8 for 81 on 12 targets. And I think a lot of people, they see Cedric Tillman and they're like, hey, this could be a really fun buy, or it was at least a really good pickup off of waiver wires. But I don't think that they see long-term future upside with Cedric Tillman. And I think I do. I think that I'm starting to see the start of an actual breakout wide receiver. I have 2 wide receiver comparisons. I didn't name them in the slide because I didn't really want to give it away initially, but there are 2 wide receivers that comp very, very well to Cedric Tillman, prospect-wise, analytically, coming out of college. And then I think that from each of them, they kind of have similar career arcs, though he kind of, I think, is a closer athleticism arc comp to one player, and then a closer NFL career arc comp to the other player. So 2 different players in here. But to give them both to you, Kenny Golladay and Nico Collins. Those are the 2 guys when you filter down my prospect database to basically filter for similar comparisons for height, weight, speed score, burst score, like athleticism score, and somewhat of production too. Those are the two closest names to Cedric Tillman in my database. And then you look at the career arc for both these guys. Kenny Golladay come into the Detroit Lions, third round pick, came in with Golden Tate and Marvin Jones, like a mid-career Marvin Jones with Matthew Stafford. Didn't do all that much in year one. He had like 400 yards and 3 touchdowns. Year two, big breakout. Basically established himself as the team's wide receiver one over Golden Tate and Marvin Jones. Year three, even bigger breakout with Golden Tate no longer on the team. So that's kind of the career arc that Kenny Golladay followed. Nico Collins, third round pick. Also, Cedric Tillman was also a third round pick last year. Nico Collins, third round pick, comes into the Houston Texans offense, is behind Brandon Cooks for the first year or two. And then Brandon Cooks leaves. Nico Collins breaks out all of a sudden, even with Tank Dell there. Of course, it took Nico also getting CJ Stroud, massive help. But, basically, Nico did not do much in year one, did not do much in year two. Then as soon as Brandon Cooks leaves, takes over as the wide receiver one, and is just this big-bodied alpha monster wide receiver right now as a top 5, top 6 dynasty wide receiver. Fantastic. So I think that Tillman comps more favorably to Kenny Golladay in terms of athleticism. He's closer to him in terms of size, speed, all that kind of stuff. And more so production at the collegiate level than Nico Collins too. Nico is close to those two as well, but not so much athletically. Nico's a little bit faster, a little bit taller. Didn't have the production at Michigan that Kenny Golladay had at college or that Cedric Tillman had at Tennessee. But I think Nico's NFL career arc is a lot closer to what we might see from Cedric Tillman. Of course, Tillman, even though if he has a fantastic end of year, is not going to have like 1,000-yard season this year. Like Kenny Golladay did, might be closer to Nico. It's probably going to be a better year two than what Nico had. But year three, man, if the Browns have a better quarterback come in, maybe it's another rookie, maybe it's Jameis Winston, maybe they re-sign Jameis to be a bridge quarterback, and Jameis is the guy next year too. But I seriously think that Cedric Tillman is a player that has massive long-term upside to be another basically Nico Collins coming into the NFL right now. He had fantastic production coming out of Tennessee. I kind of wish that he came out as a fourth-year guy, not a fifth-year guy, but he's big. He's pretty fast for his size. He ran like a mid 4.5 at 215 pounds or something like that, 7'3" or 6'3", 73 inches. 6'3", 215 pounds or whatever, ran mid 4.5. And I watched his tape. I went back and watched the tape of all of his routes. They're not gimmicky routes. They're not like he's just winning on busted coverage. He's not getting a bunch of screens. He's just out there and on the X position, running post routes, running slant routes, running deep through the seam, busting up a couple of cover 2 safeties, and he's winning on these routes. It's kind of the same thing that Nico Collins was doing before his big breakout, and we saw flashes of it with Nico. Justin was all in on Nico for basically 2 years until it eventually worked out last year. He talked about Nico as a buy low last summer before he eventually broke out. So Cedric Tillman, man, might be my Nico Collins, like how Nico was for Justin. And I think that he is an excellent buy. You look at his KTC value. His value, of course, skyrocketed. He's up to the wide receiver. Where was he? He was down in here somewhere. Wide receiver 69. Nice. His KTC value rose 142 spots at the wide receiver position, but he is still wide receiver 69, 169 overall in Superflex rankings. Wide receiver 69 is not that high, man. I mean, he's 1 spot behind Luke McCaffrey, 2 spots behind Juwan Jennings, 3 spots behind Jerry Jeudy. He's still behind Christian Kirk, Michael Wilson, Quentin Johnson, DeAndre Hopkins, Troy Franklin, Jalen Polk, Rashad Bateman, Jacoby Myers, Adonai Mitchell, Demario Douglas. And he's just ahead of Hollywood Brown, Jalen Tolbert, Alec Pierce, Jermaine Burton, Andre Yoshivas, Trey Tucker, Jordan Whittington. These are all names that I just don't think have the upside that Cedric Tillman has. I would very easily love to go buy Cedric Tillman for any of these wide receivers because you're really not moving, you're not losing wide receiver depth. You're not really losing production. If anything, you're gaining production with Cedric Tillman. You're not losing draft capital to do it. I've had questions. People have asked me if I believe in Cedric Tillman enough to buy him for a second. I would not pay a second round pick for Cedric Tillman, but that also is because I just don't think that you have to. Like you're not paying a second round pick for Michael Wilson right now or Jerry Jeudy, or you don't really have to do it for Quentin Johnston or Jalen Polk or Troy Franklin right now. Multiple thirds, one of these players in a third. I would do that for Cedric Tillman and see if you can, capitalize on even his increased value, but capitalize still on the fact that I think his value is lower than where it should be based on what he's done for the past 2 weeks. And I don't really know why that stops with Jameis Winston for the remainder of the year. So I think that if somebody in your league picked up Cedric Tillman off the waiver wire, that I think that if you just dangled in front of their face a quick ROI name, like just like a fun, like Michael Wilson might get it done. He's a good name to instantly ROI to get Cedric Tillman. I think Adonai Mitchell might be another one. Maybe it's Jalen Polk or DeAndre Hopkins. Even move that over and you get Cedric Tillman. I mean, these are kind of name value-ish names, or names that we associated with higher value in the offseason than Cedric Tillman. They might bite on that and view that as an instant ROI off a waiver wire piece. So those are trades that I would go and see if we can buy Cedric Tillman for right now, because I genuinely think that he has the ability to become Nico Collins is a very, very high ceiling, but even Kenny Golladay is a pretty high ceiling. But I think that Cedric Tillman has the ability to become a top 40, top 35 dynasty wide receiver. And he's at wide receiver 69 right now, and was a waiver wire pickup for a lot of people. So that's where we're going to end it, with Cedric Tillman on a very high note right there, with me putting a bunch of trust into him, but imbuing my confidence into Cedric Tillman, and hopefully that confidence resonates with you guys to be able to go buy Cedric Tillman. So that's where we're going to end it. I appreciate all of you for watching the video, for sticking around, even if we're for 20 minutes. Usually these videos are a lot longer, but I apologize for not being able to go game by game this week, but hopefully this, satisfied the appetite a little bit until we can then get back to the game by games next week. So appreciate everybody for watching and for hanging out. And until next time, next week, and until the Friday AMA at 12 p.m. Eastern time, I will catch you guys in the next video. Peace.